Hello, Bob Thompson. Welcome to the Doing CX Right show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to meet you, Stacy.
Yes, you have been writing and building a community for so long, and it's wonderful to put a name to a face and put it all together and bring the human element to all the words. So let me start with that. I know who you are, but tell the world, what do you do professionally?
Well, currently I'm running the customer-centric.com online community. And so that means a number of different things. It's just like podcasting, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes that is really hard to describe, but it's a lot of work. We have over 4,000 contributing authors. We publish 3,000 or so posts every year. And there's a lot to kind of stay on top of. I get 500 emails a day, but I love it because it's part of a community that cares about customers. And so that's really how this whole thing started. I had worked for IBM for 16 years, and I worked for another tech firm for about 3 years. And so for, a couple of decades, I was mainly in a sales, marketing, leadership roles in the technology industry. The thing that I enjoyed the most over all that time was working with customers. And except for maybe a few months here and there when I was working in staff jobs, that's what I did. And I just love the interaction. I love advocating for my customer and helping get the kind of solutions that were going to help their business. So this notion of customer relationships was really baked into me through my experience. I was searching for something to do, I guess, after all these years in the tech industry, and I wanted to do more consulting and more thought leadership type of work. And I came across this term called CRM, Customer Relationship Management. Now, these days, people, in fact, for quite a long time now, people associate that with technology. That wasn't really what I was thinking about. It's like, yeah, there's technology, but there is so much more to a customer relationship. And I just thought it was a fertile area to invest my time, try to build a business, and do something that might help create better relationships. And that carried me for a few months. And then what I realized is that it's such a big area. And there's so many facets to this topic, whether you like CRM or customer-centricity or CX, I really don't care. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference to most business people either. But there's so many different angles to it that I started reaching out to some of my colleagues in the industry, just a handful to start, and saying, hey, I don't have all the answers to this. Why don't we start an online community? And initially, it was just an email-based thing. Over the years, it grew into a more web presence. So now we publish a newsletter each week and publish all these blog posts and articles. And we are currently serving about 2.5 million visitors a year. But it all started from a notion that, hey, customer relationships are pretty cool. We ought to do things to make them better. It ought to be a profitable business thing to do too. It's not just altruistic in the sense of customers win, you lose. It should be a win-win, ideally. And it's just grown and grown over the years. So that's what I do, and that's where it started.
I call it the power of intention. The intention to do good, the intention to build a community, the intention of thought leadership. It's not by accident. And it's a perfect time to say this because CX Day is coming next week. And that's an intention in these companies. And, in small companies, big companies, wherever, it's an intention to do all this. And when there's passion behind it, look what happens.
Yeah, there's, that to me is probably the single most important thing is that, and especially at senior levels, that if you don't have the passion, if you don't truly believe it, it's important that you're going to put your energy behind it, not much is going to happen. And in my experience and in a lot of the research I've done, we've done tons of research with our community over the years, and we have lots of reports that we put out, but it all points back to having a leadership and a culture that really does care about customers. And then they line up their practices, their metrics, and how they reward people. All of it is in support of that strategy. Now, if you don't start with that and you're trying to convince senior leaders that it is important to care about customers, and it's not the way they're wired, it's really a tough road. It really is. So it's not an impossible journey, but it's much harder for companies that have been used to operating with a different sort of paradigm.
So you talk a lot about being hooked on customers, almost like an addiction, hooked.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Well, think about what the term hooked means. It does mean addicted. And I had a few people kind of question that terminology, and rightly so. The way I look at it is that let's turn it around. What does it mean for a customer to be hooked on a business? It's called customer loyalty, right? In our dreams, we would like all of our customers to say, you guys are so amazing. I'm never going to do business with anybody else. I feel that way about a few brands, Trader Joe's, Southwest Airlines. These are brands everybody likes to talk about. I have some local companies that I really enjoy doing business with. So I am hooked on them, right? I'm loyal to them. So I turned that around. I was thinking about what to title my book. And I said, really, what I learned fairly early on, this book came out of almost 10 years of research, is that if you want customers to be hooked on you, you've got to be hooked on them. It's like, addicted to them. And it's not a one-way street. And so the research was based initially on observation. I just, as I wrote articles and talked to lots of people over the years, it's like, well, what are some of the things that companies that have very loyal customers do? Starting with, listening to them. It's perhaps the most obvious trait, something the CX industry has embraced. So, you listen to customers. That's one way to be hooked on them. But there's a lot more to it. The other habits, that's number one, are to think, to use analytics, to make fact-based decisions based on customer data when that makes sense, to empower employees, to create, to basically a way of saying to innovate and to delight. Those last two are probably the most controversial because I think there's definitely benefits to be had for a lot of companies for doing the basics, fixing problems, improving processes, and the like. But what I found in my initial research and then just recently in the last couple of years is that the top performing CX brands put more emphasis on creating these moments, these call it delight if you want, moments that matter, but they're trying to stand out in their customers' minds and emotions. So they're doing things differently, they're innovating, and they're also trying to find ways to capture that emotional spark. So not just doing 100% of the time exactly what the customer asks you to do, but looking for ways to say, oh, that was great, and do it in a way that's profitable. So the biggest complaint I've got over the years is like, well, delight, that doesn't work because you just can't delight people all the time. And I've defended it quite a bit. And I said, it doesn't make any sense to delight people all the time because then it's expected. Then it's not delight anymore. So it is a tricky proposition, but there's tons of research outside of what I've done that backs up this notion of trying to stand out. Having said all of that, my perspective is that you have to get some of the basics done first. It doesn't really, help to try to delight your customers when you're not answering the phones and doing basic things. So a lot of companies are still trying to solve these basic problems and never quite get to these more advanced things.
You are 100% speaking my language in getting the basics right. Forget about all the sophisticated platforms and ways to measure and predictive modeling. Yes, that's good. You need that one day. Or if you're already doing CX well, then yes, get to that. But if you're just starting out or you're just, I like to call crawl, walk, run, and you're just crawling or slowly walking, yes, pick up the phone and and respond and do the
Yeah.
basics. You're right. Why is that so hard?
I don't know. A lot of the stuff I've seen over the years just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I remember somebody, some conferences at one time, they called it calcification, that companies get kind of stuck in the way, here's how we do business. And I have to say, IBM had a culture that preached being customer-centric, but it was also a company that was very inwardly focused. And those two were kind of in conflict. And it reached a head, toward the end of my tenure there when we had a new CEO come in, Lou Gerstner, and he tried his best to dismantle some of these, old ways of thinking and get more in touch with customers. But, IBM was a very successful firm. And I think a lot of times this calcification sets in not from failure, but from success. Hey, this is working. We're making money. I don't
Mm.
understand why we have to do things differently just because, Trader Joe's is doing it. Who cares? And I get that. I run my own business and I can't say that I adhere to every single practice that we've researched either. Company leaders have to make choices about what to do and what not to do. But I think the core issue is that what we've done is working or has worked. And so why change? And change is always hard in an organization.
That's the best answer I've heard. It really makes sense. If it's not broken, don't fix it. But we know the reality that competitors are not working that way and they're not differentiating based on price. So it's going to catch up no matter what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we've explored in recent years is and I was a little bit disappointed in the results here because my hypothesis was that leading brands did a significantly better job in a statistical sense. They did a significantly better job in monitoring their position versus competitors. And I got kind of mixed results to that. It wasn't very conclusive. My theory was and still is that you can get better. I mean, one of the things I enjoy doing is playing tennis, right? So I'm not very good these days. I'm getting a little old to play with some of the young guys, but I still love playing tennis. But imagine that the goal of tennis, like any sport, is you're trying to win matches, right? So if you're not winning against people that you want to win against, you need to get better. If you keep getting a little bit better, taking lessons and practicing, and you get better, but your competitors are also doing those same things, there's no change in position. So my theory is that you have to pay attention to your competitors. It's not just your customers that matter. And if you see your competitors basically matching you, which is what Forrester Research has found, this sort of lockstep sort of progress, there's no change in position, competitive position. And that's what senior executives say they want. It's like, we want to be better than those other guys. Well, just getting a little bit better, it's, you don't want to fall behind, but you're not getting ahead by doing that. And that's where thinking more clearly about how we're truly differentiated. So yeah, we want to get a little bit better, stop stupid processes and listen to customers, fix problems, all that. It's all good, but it's hard for me to see how, Vons is different from Ralph's, is different from most supermarkets. They're all kind of the same. So if they're local, you go shop there. But my wife and I drive 20 minutes to go shop at Trader Joe's. And
Me
it's not
too.
because
Me too.
they're cheap. I mean, they're affordable. It's decent pricing, but I know it's not the cheapest deal and it's inconvenient. So I use that as an example to say, top brands, yeah, they get the basics right, but they're trying to stand out as well.
I shared this on another episode, but I have to say it again because you brought up Trader Joe's, and I honestly I'm such a diehard Trader Joe's, and it's a dream come true, by the way, for a brand. A, that we're talking about them, but two, if you go on Facebook, there are tons of communities of Facebook fans, not the company driven community, but people like you and I talking about the favorite products they just bought today and recipes. What a dream come true for a brand.
Right. And this was something that, and I was slightly surprised by this. We did some formal research a couple of years ago, and I want to make sure I read the conclusion accurately here. So that we came up with 5 customer experience practices. So acting on feedback was one of them. Journey mapping was another. Committed senior executives, a business case, those were all statistically important. It separated those that were, we call them developing. They were making some progress, but they couldn't quantify it. They didn't get to the point where they said, yeah, we're seeing an ROI, we're seeing competitive differentiation. That category we called winning, right? So you're doing what senior executives want. The last one was have a commonly understood brand vision and promise that guides the CX strategy. And so this gets back to, something you talked about, what is your intent? What is your purpose? I think is what you're getting at. It's like, why are we here? We're here to sell widgets. Are we here to make lives better? Now, Trader Joe's is very camera shy. They don't like to be interviewed. It's hard to really, most of what I've learned about them is from my own experiences of talking to other people. But you can see their brand purpose in how all their people act, the kind of products they stock, the way they behave. And they didn't sit around and say, what's our CX strategy? They had a reason, they had a purpose for their brand that really, it's like, we want to be different. We want to be better. And I think that some companies lack that first piece. And it is important, at least according to our research, that you figure that out. And I talked to some companies during this research that said, we were trying to build a CX strategy and we realized we didn't know what we're doing here. I'm paraphrasing, but what is our purpose? And they took a lot of time out to really think that through, and then really flowing that into a CX strategy made a whole lot more sense.
Mm. So we both agree Trader Joe's is doing CX right. Part of that, and I also interviewed some employees there, and part of it is because the leadership and management empower their people and they're fully engaged. So on that note, what advice do you have to companies to drive employee engagement?
Yeah, that's first of all, the whole term is somewhat vague and confusing. I'm not sure I can give you any one thing. I talked earlier about, there's some companies that you can just tell they really care about their customers. And I put Trader Joe's and Southwest and, leading brands like that, you can just feel it. And I think the same is true of how employees are treated. Platitudes only go so far. So it is a complex topic. I remember I wrote about it quite a bit in my book. It's one of the 5 habits, empowering employees. And I use the term empower rather than engagement for an important reason, I think, which is it's not just about job satisfaction. I don't agree, and I'd be happy to debate this with you as well. I don't agree with those who say, if you just have happy employees, then everything else is going to be great. Customers are going to love you, business is going to prosper. That's not my experience in the working world. The research actually doesn't back that up either. They're really interrelated things. Engaged employees do help improve customer satisfaction. You can see at least a correlation there, and in some cases a causal relationship. But the reverse is also true, that in the right culture, that employees feel better about their work when their customers are happy. It's not a linear relationship. In fact, the one bit of research I've leaned on quite a bit in my book and elsewhere is that when this has been studied very scientifically, they found that they're interrelated. It's a two-way kind of causation. So I'm not a big fan of this, what's come first sort of thing. And I know that if you talk to certain business leaders, they will tell you, oh, the employees come first, including Southwest. And I suspect Trader Joe's might say the same thing. And I actually interviewed somebody at a tech firm who I thought it was kind of odd that everything that they espoused, officially was about their customer first agenda. I don't remember their exact term, but like we care about customers, and they supported that with metrics and all kinds of things. But then their CEO would say, "Well, no, our customers come first." I said, "Well, I don't get it. So which is it?" And he gave me the best answer, I think, and I think this makes sense for most companies, is that at a strategic level, show me one company, and I'm not talking about VC startups that they're spending their investors' money, but show me one viable, long-term, successful company that gets revenue from their employees. I haven't seen one. Customers are still the source of our success long term. And so I make no apologies for saying I am all about being customer centric, but not to the point of saying, well, employees don't matter and the stakeholders, the shareholders don't matter. They all matter. But what is your guiding principle? Are you going to drive your success by delivering more and better value to your customers? Then how are you going to do that? So back to what the CEO told me. He says, look, here's the thing. The customers first mantra is really our corporate strategy. But operationally, to execute against that strategy, we have to take care of our employees. But there's a directionality to what you're doing. It's not just, pay them more money and let them do whatever the hell they want. There's still, the mission is to deliver value to customers. So they don't lose sight of that, yeah, we want our employees to be happy, productive, engaged, whatever you want to use the term, but we're empowering them to execute on our corporate strategy, which is still customer value, customer experience. So I think that sometimes we take at face value things that CEOs say, because it sounds good to their employees or maybe to whoever their audience is. But I think the reality is that, Southwest wouldn't be successful if they just said, well, what do we have to do here to make happy employees? Well, let's just do that. And then somehow the planes will fly and the customers will be happy. No, they didn't do that. Study the history. They did not do that. Neither did Trader Joe's. So strategically, I still feel that focusing on your customers and then driving strategy from there is the right way to go about it. But it shouldn't be at the expense of employees or other stakeholders.
I love your views. I love that you're speaking up differently. And that's good. Everybody has an opinion on this, and there's not 100% right or wrong, but certainly a lot of experiences that can guide your decision making. And so it sounds like I know the answer to what you simply said before. A very controversial topic is, do you link NPS scores and CSAT scores to employee pay? That is very controversial, different perspectives. So it sounds like you're saying, no, don't do that.
I wouldn't say that, no. This is a tricky area. It definitely is. And I've poked around at it a number of times over the years. So I could argue it both ways. I'm an analyst, so I can find data to support either position.
Yes.
But my take on it, first of all, let's look at how businesses are run. All right, let's be practical for a second. So I've read some commentary recently in our community and elsewhere that say, well, you shouldn't pay people for NPS improvements or whatever the metric is. And I'll come back to why I think that may be true in some cases, but I also say, well, all right, so you shouldn't pay salespeople for selling either. You shouldn't pay customer service people for solving cases either. You shouldn't pay the CFO for managing cash either, because those can be gamed, right? Any metric can be gamed. And having come from, part of my career at IBM was in sales, I can tell you gaming is inherent in every single job in a corporation. you can fudge the numbers and you can chase the number instead of what the number was supposed to represent. That's the argument against, connecting it to NPS. Like, well, they're just going to game it, and that's going to be the goal instead of actual happy customers. And I get that. It's like, okay, so let's get rid of all the other metrics that are gamed. And I just think it. I found examples over the years where it's done poorly, and examples where it's done well. And I can tell you that top brands figure out that you can actually pay in a reasonable way, in a moderate way, so that you're not putting an over reliance on one metric. Like if your score goes down, you're fired, or you're getting a big bonus if it goes up. It's tricky though, and not a lot of companies are adept at doing it right. So that's where I think the commentary is like, well, then just nobody should do it. It's like, all right, well, look, I can give you a dozen examples of companies who are doing it. It didn't screw them up. People do like to get rewarded for doing a good job. And you know what? They do manage the gaming problem well. Now, having said all that, I think there's also a good argument to be made to consider other metrics, other ways to reward people, including things like, and I don't know if there's any formal research on this, but I think it makes sense to say, well, instead of improving scores, let's pay people for resolving customer complaints or customer incidents. Can we reward the activities that we want people to do as opposed to keeping them so focused on the number that it encourages, weird behavior? I think there's an argument for that. I know some companies have had some success with that. Some of my colleagues have argued that's a better way of doing it, and they may be right.
Yeah.
I just don't agree that you just throw out the idea of paying on a metric just because it can be done poorly. It's like, why not do it better? Make it part of the mix. This whole idea of a balanced scorecard it isn't all dependent on one metric. And I can say that because I've managed my business this way for years. And when I was at IBM, we had bonuses based on a number of different things, and it helped to kind of moderate the influence of any one thing. So it's a very nuanced and I think a bit of a controversial subject. And I just say I think you can do it right if you know what you're doing.
We could spend the whole episode on this topic, but we have come to the end. So I want to finish off by saying two things. And this is short answers. One, if I had a ton of CEOs and leaders in my room right now, and you could tell them one thing, one takeaway, what would it be?
Well, there's no question in my mind what it is. We found this through tons of research over the years. It's setting a good example personally is the single most important thing. Call it walking the talk, if you like. It's if you say something's important, but what you do says it's maybe not so important. Yeah, you ought to listen to customers, but I have no time for customer meetings because I got to deal with employees and with the board and on it goes. People pick up on all of these cues. And so do you need to answer the phones? Well, maybe occasionally it would help if you spend a little time as a CEO in the shoes or the seats of people answering the phones or going on calls and whatnot. That's a trait that I've seen a number of successful CEOs employ. But whatever you espouse as we want to deliver a great customer experience and we're listening and we're doing all this stuff, fine. Find some ways to really illustrate that in your own personal behavior. And it's the single biggest differentiator between top performing CX programs and those that are not performing very well.
Consistency is everything, and living your truth is everything. Yep. Finally, last question. If you could go back in time to your younger self, let's say 20-year-old Bob, based on what you know now that you didn't know then, what would you tell your younger self?
Oh, that's really a tough question. I think a lot of life is about, what you learn as you go. I'm not sure I could answer your question about my 20-year-old self, but I'll say, what I've learned over the last 25 years or so is be thoughtful about what you commit to. Be really willing and able to execute as flawlessly as you can. It's the expression I've heard, I think makes a lot of sense, is put all your wood behind one arrowhead. And the idea here is to be focused, right? It's so when I think back to some of what I think were mistakes, what cost me money, cost me time, it's trying to do too many things. So there's a balance between innovation and trying things. So I'm not completely regretful of these failures or mistakes. But what I've learned to do over the last maybe 10 years or so is to really think about, okay, well, what if this works? It's great to try something. What if this works? Am I prepared to really execute against it flawlessly for a long period of time? You have to be ready to really, again, put the wood behind that arrowhead and be focused and diligent. And I think if I had thought about that a bit more, there's a few things I would have said, well, it was fun to try that, but no, I don't think I can execute that one well. I'm going to drop it. As opposed to sort of letting them flounder along and then having to stop doing some things.
So bottom line is that staying focused allows you to deliver on the promise.
That's right. And, going back to just my observations and research over the year that, you don't see Trader Joe's saying, Ralph's has got a bigger selection of fresh fish. We should do that. I don't know. Maybe they'll bring in fresh fish. I wouldn't mind it if they did. But the point is that they have picked some things that they do well, and they execute just great.
Yeah.
And I think Southwest is another good example. Sorry to use that one again. They don't give boarding passes, and there's a long list of things they don't do. But what they do really well.
Really well.
And so this is what I mean by being focused, having a brand promise, and you just deliver it relentlessly.
Yes.
Trying to please everybody just doesn't work.
Well, we could have spent a whole nother hour then on that topic of Amazon, because that's not as focused, but we're not going to do that today. I'm so happy to have you on my show, and I know people are going to want to find you, which I'll include in the show notes. But what's the best? Is it LinkedIn, a website? Where would you recommend?
Well, come visit us at customer-centric.com. There's obviously a lot of content there. You can sign up for a newsletter. We even have to encourage people to sign up and join our new newsletter list. We have a free ebook that we offer people on the top 5 habits of successful CX programs. So that's the best way. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. And you can always email me at bob@customer-centric.com. So if you want to find me, I'm easy to find.
Well, thank you again so much for your time and your wisdom and your passion here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk with you. And thank you for being a great contributor to our community with your blogging. And, we need your energy, we need your insights and discussion. So
thank you.
Keep doing it.
Thank you.